The fluorescent lights of the Oakmont Ridge Clubhouse meeting room hummed with a sterile indifference that felt almost mocking. Marcus Thompson stood before the Architectural Control Committee, a three-person tribunal seated at a folding table, his hands resting lightly on a simple architectural drawing. The air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, felt heavy, charged with a quiet hostility he couldn't quite name but had come to recognize as the default atmosphere whenever Patricia Williams was in charge. So, to reiterate, Mr. Thompson, Patricia began, her voice a model of practiced, condescending patience. You are requesting approval to plant a single Quercus alba, a white oak, at the location marked here on your landscape plan. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the spot, a gesture that managed to be both precise and dismissive. Patricia, the newly elected president of the Oakmont Ridge Homeowners Association and chair of its most powerful committee, was a woman composed of sharp angles and muted colors. From her severe gray pantsuit to the tight bun that pulled her hair back from a face that rarely betrayed emotion beyond a vague, persistent disapproval. That's correct, Marcus said, keeping his own voice level and respectful. It would be a memorial tree for my grandfather. Howard. He owned the home before me. He always wanted an oak right there, where he could see it from the sunroom window. He had expected this to be a formality, a tree. It was a native species, approved on the community's master planting list, and positioned well within the boundaries of his private lot. He had followed the application process to the letter, submitting the form and the $8 processing fee 3 weeks in advance, as stipulated in the association's rules and regulations. Patricia exchanged a brief, meaningful glance with the other two committee members, a retired accountant named Gerald, and a woman who introduced herself only as Doris. Both offered Marcus weak, apologetic smiles before their eyes darted back to Patricia, awaiting their cue. While the committee appreciates the sentiment, Patricia said, folding her hands atop a neatly organized stack of papers, we must consider the governing documents, specifically the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Article 8, Section 8.4.2, which addresses landscaping and view corridors. Your property, Lot 72, abuts a common area, the West Meadow Park. As such, it is subject to a view corridor easement that protects the aesthetic sightlines from the park's designated scenic overlook. Marcus blinked. A view corridor. Forgive me, but the spot where I want to plant the tree is over 100 feet from the property line. The park's overlook is on a small rise on the other side of the meadow. An oak sapling isn't going to block anyone's view for at least 30 years, if ever. The CC&Rs are not concerned with timelines, Mr. Thompson. They are concerned with precedent and the perpetual protection of community assets, Patricia stated, the words flowing as if from a legal textbook. The rule prohibits any planting that has the potential to obstruct the designated view. A mature white oak can reach a height of 80 feet. The committee's interpretation, which is granted full authority by the bylaws, is that this constitutes a potential obstruction. The logic was so circular, so perfectly bureaucratic, that Marcus felt a surge of frustration heat his neck. It was a rule designed to be selectively weaponized. He had seen at least a dozen other homes bordering the park with mature trees, some much larger than an oak would ever be. With all due respect, Patricia, he began, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. My neighbor, 2 doors down, on Lot 70 has a line of 20-foot Leyland cypresses along his back fence. They completely block the view of the meadow from the street. Was that approved? Patricia's expression did not change. The ACC cannot comment on the status of other properties. We are here to discuss your application, which, I'm afraid, we must deny. She picked up a gavel that seemed absurdly large for the folding table and brought it down with a soft, final thud. This meeting is adjourned. The social humiliation was swift and absolute. Several other homeowners waiting for their own hearings watched him gather his drawing, their faces a mixture of pity and a palpable relief that it wasn't them. As he walked out of the clubhouse and into the crisp October air, the feeling of being singled out was as clear and sharp as the autumn sky. He hadn't just been denied a permit. He had been publicly put in his place. He didn't know why, but he knew with bone-deep certainty that this was not about a tree. It was about him, and it was just the beginning. The house on Sycamore Lane was more than just a structure of wood and brick to Marcus. It was a living archive of his life. He had spent his summers here as a boy, learning how to patch drywall and wire an outlet from his grandfather, Howard Thompson. It was Howard who had taught him the methodical patience and respect for order that made him a successful electrical contractor. Every schematic he drew, every circuit he completed, was a quiet tribute to the man who had raised him after his parents' early passing. When Howard died 2 years ago, leaving the house and its surrounding 2 acres to Marcus in a carefully structured trust, it felt less like an inheritance and more like a sacred stewardship. He and his wife, Sarah, had moved in 6 months ago, leaving behind their cramped city apartment for the sprawling quiet of Oakmont Ridge. Sarah, a freelance bookkeeper with a mind as organized as her color-coded file cabinets, had immediately fallen in love with the place. She had converted a spare bedroom into a sun-drenched home office, where she managed the finances of a dozen small businesses. Her calm presence, a grounding force in Marcus's life. Tonight, she was at her desk, the soft click of her keyboard a familiar, comforting rhythm in the quiet house. "I don't understand it," Marcus said, pacing the length of the living room. He had just recounted the ACC meeting, and the injustice of it still burned. She had an answer for everything. It was like she was waiting for me. CC&Rs, bylaws, view corridors. It's a complete abuse of power. Sarah swiveled in her chair, her expression a mixture of sympathy and pragmatism. "It sounds like she's one of those HOA presidents, the ones who get a little bit of authority and let it go to their heads. Don't let her get to you." "It's not just that," Marcus insisted. He stopped in front of the large picture window that overlooked the backyard. "This house. It's Grandpa Howard's legacy. He loved this land. He bought it before the development was even built. That tree was important to him. For her to deny it on a technicality that she clearly doesn't apply to anyone else. It feels personal." He walked over to the built-in bookshelf that housed his grandfather's old records. Tucked away on a lower shelf was a thick, 3-ring binder with a simple label, Oakmont Ridge, HOA governing documents. When they moved in, he had read the entire thing, cover to cover. As an electrician, he lived by codes and regulations. He believed that knowing the rules was the best way to ensure fairness. He pulled the binder out and flipped through the tabbed sections. "Here it is," he said, finding the page he was looking for. He ran his finger down the dense text. Article 8, Landscaping, Section 8.4.2. No planting, fence, or other structure shall be erected on any lot subject to a designated view corridor easement that has the potential, upon maturity, to materially obstruct the primary sightline from a common area scenic overlook. He took out a yellow highlighter and marked the entire section, a frown creasing his brow. The language was vague, subjective, potential, maturity, materially obstruct. A lawyer could drive a truck through those words. He continued flipping through the pages, his frustration mounting. This was the system Patricia was using against him. A system of rules so dense and convoluted that they could be interpreted any way the board saw fit. His eyes landed on another section, seemingly unrelated. Article 11, General Provisions. Section 11.7, Easement Disclosures. Upon written request from any member in good standing, the association shall provide, within 30 business days, true and correct copies of any and all easement deeds, plat maps, and other relevant recorded instruments pertaining to the member's lot or adjacent common areas. He highlighted that, too. It was a small thing, a simple disclosure rule, but it felt like a tool. If Patricia was going to fight him with the documents, he would have to fight back with the same. He didn't know yet what he was looking for, but he knew the answers had to be in the paper trail. The system had to have a schematic, a logic he could understand, and, if necessary, use to defend himself. He closed the binder with a firm snap. The fight wasn't about a tree anymore. It was about the principle of the thing. It was about protecting the home his grandfather had built from a woman who seemed determined to poison his peace. 2 weeks passed, a period of tense, watchful quiet. Marcus half expected another letter, another manufactured complaint. When it finally came, it was not the informal, polite email he might have anticipated. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon via certified mail, a green slip from the postal carrier demanding his signature. The formality of it was the first warning. The envelope was from Oakmont Ridge HOA, CO Pembroke Management Services, the professional firm that handled the association's day-to-day administration. Inside, a single sheet of heavy bond paper detailed the offense in cold, impersonal language. Official notice of violation. Date October 19th. Property 12, Sycamore Lane, Lot 72. Owner Marcus Thompson. Nature of violation: landscaping, non-compliance, in violation of CC&R, GR 8.4.2, landscaping and view corridors. Description: the mature privet hedge, located along the western property line of Lot 72, adjacent to the common area known as West Meadow Park, exceeds the maximum permissible height and density within the designated view corridor easement. Required action: the aforementioned hedge must be trimmed to a height not to exceed 4 feet, or be removed entirely. Cure period: this violation must be cured within 14 days of the date of this notice. Penalty: failure to cure the violation by the deadline will result in an initial fine of $100, with further fines to be assessed in accordance with the association's duly adopted fine policy. Marcus read the letter 3 times. The hedge. It was the same hedge that had been there for 40 years, planted by his grandfather long before the HOA even existed. It was a perfectly maintained, beautiful feature of the landscape that provided a gentle screen of privacy from the park. He walked out to the backyard and stared at it. It was perhaps 7 feet tall, a thick, green wall that defined the edge of his property. The idea that it was suddenly a violation of a view corridor was absurd. He could see at least 5 other properties from where he stood, with identical or larger hedges bordering the park. His anger was a cold, slow burn. This was a clear escalation. The denial of the memorial tree had been a shot across the bow. This was the first direct torpedo. Patricia was using an existing feature of his property, one that had been grandfathered in by any reasonable standard, to manufacture a costly and destructive compliance demand. Removing that hedge would cost thousands of dollars and ruin the aesthetic of the yard his grandfather had so lovingly cultivated. He felt a familiar certainty settle in his gut. This was not random. It was targeted. And, if he didn't fight it now, it would never stop. He picked up the phone and called the number for Pembroke Management Services listed on the letterhead. He requested, politely but firmly, a formal hearing before the board of directors to appeal the violation, as was his right under the bylaws. Then, he sat down at his computer and began drafting a second letter. This one, addressed to the board of directors, formally requesting all documents related to his property under CC&R paragraph 11.7. He was going to find the schematic for this rigged machine. The board hearing was scheduled for November 2nd, held in the same soulless clubhouse meeting room where his tree had been denied. This time, the full 5-member board of directors was present. Seated at a long table at the front of the room, Patricia Williams, as president, sat in the center, a picture of serene authority. To her right sat Eleanor Vance, a retired librarian in her late 60s who had lived in Oakmont Ridge for 30 years. Her expression was pinched with a discomfort that suggested she would rather be anywhere else. The other 3 members were a blur of bland, middle-aged faces who seemed to take their cues directly from Patricia. Marcus had prepared meticulously. Sarah had helped him organize his presentation into a logical, compelling argument. He had a copy of his official property survey, clearly marking his lot lines. He had a series of high-quality photographs taken from the park's scenic overlook, demonstrating that his hedge had virtually no impact on the view of the distant hills. He had photos of 5 other properties with larger, more obstructive hedges that were apparently in full compliance. He even had a signed affidavit from his next-door neighbor, confirming the hedge had been in its current state for decades. He stood before them at a small lectern, the scent of stale coffee once again hanging in the air. "Good evening, members of the board," he began, his voice calm and steady. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm here to appeal the violation notice dated October 19th regarding the hedge on my property." For 10 minutes, he laid out his case. He was respectful, factual, and thorough. He presented the survey, showing the hedge was entirely on his private lot. He displayed the photographs, making a clear visual argument against the claim of view obstruction. He pointed to the selective nature of the enforcement, referencing the other, non-compliant properties. He concluded by respectfully arguing that the hedge was a pre-existing feature of the property that should be considered grandfathered, as it predated the establishment of the HOA itself. When he finished, the room was silent. He had presented an airtight, logical defense. He felt a flicker of hope that reason might prevail. Patricia smiled, a thin, bloodless expression that did not reach her eyes. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Thompson. The board appreciates you taking the time to share your perspective." She then turned to the other board members. "Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Thompson?" No one spoke. Their eyes were fixed on the table in front of them. "Very well," Patricia said smoothly. "The board has reviewed the violation as reported by the management company and has considered Mr. Thompson's appeal. Is there a motion?" One of her allies, a man named Bob, spoke up immediately in a monotone voice. "I move to uphold the violation as issued and deny the appeal." "Is there a second?" Patricia asked. Another board member mumbled, "Second." "All in favor?" Patricia, Bob, and the other 2 allies raised their hands immediately. Marcus's eyes shot to Eleanor Vance. She hesitated, her hand hovering for a moment over the table. She glanced at Marcus, her face a mask of conflict, before slowly, reluctantly, raising her hand. "The motion carries. 5-0, Patricia announced, a hint of triumph in her voice. "Mr. Thompson, you are hereby instructed to cure the violation as detailed in the notice. The 14-day cure period will be extended to begin from today's date. Thank you for your time." She banged the small gavel, and just like that, it was over. Marcus stood frozen at the lectern. He had come armed with facts, evidence, and reason. He had lost to a preordained political maneuver. It wasn't a hearing. It was a show trial. The system wasn't just biased. It was completely, irrevocably rigged against him. As he packed his materials, the weight of his new reality settled upon him. He was alone, fighting an organization that held all the power, an organization run by a woman who, for reasons he could not fathom, was intent on making his life a misery. The polite letters and formal hearings were just a facade. This was war. The fines began as a trickle, then became a flood. The first $100 charge appeared on his monthly HOA statement, dated November 9th. A week later, another charge appeared, second notice, fine assessment $200. By the first week of December, the total was over $1,500, bloated by late fees and vaguely defined administrative charges. Every letter from Pembroke management was colder, more demanding than the last. The bureaucratic machine was working exactly as designed, slowly and inexorably grinding him down. Marcus refused to touch the hedge. To do so would be to surrender, to admit that Patricia's campaign of targeted harassment was legitimate. Instead, he funneled his anger into his investigation. He started by speaking to his neighbors, but found most were too intimidated to talk openly. They spoke in hushed tones about Patricia's unpleasantness and her knack for finding violations on the properties of anyone who crossed her. He did learn, however, that the 4 families who had been forced out over the past few years had all lived on large lots bordering community parks or open spaces, lots like his. It was a pattern, but he needed more than anecdotal evidence. He needed an expert. His search led him to a name passed along by a sympathetic contractor. He knew Mr. Abernathy. Arthur Abernathy lived 3 streets over, in a modest home filled with overflowing bookshelves and the dusty scent of old paper. A retired title insurance agent. He was a small, bird-like man in his 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that lit up with interest as Marcus explained his situation. Patricia Williams, Abernathy mused, steepling his fingers. Her family, the Morrisons, have been in real estate development in this county for 3 generations. Deep roots, deep pockets. He listened intently as Marcus detailed the view corridor easement, the selective enforcement, and the escalating fines. An easement is a phantom, Abernathy said, a twinkle in his eye. It's a right that one party has over the property of another, but it lives only on paper. To understand the phantom, you have to find its birth certificate. Let me make some inquiries down at the county recorder's office. I still have a few friends there who owe me favors. A week later, Abernathy called Marcus with a note of suppressed excitement in his voice. I think I have something. Meet me at my place this afternoon, and bring that binder of yours. When Marcus arrived, Abernathy's dining room table was covered in large, rolled-up documents. They were official county records, brittle with age. This, Abernathy announced, unrolling a massive sheet, is the master plat map for the Oakmont Ridge development, recorded in 1988. He pointed to Marcus's lot, clearly labeled Major 72. A faint, dotted line ran along the western edge, the same line where his hedge stood. Next to the line was a tiny, almost illegible annotation. Abernathy handed Marcus a magnifying glass. What does that say? Marcus squinted. It looks like, see deed, Jotcha Radiate, 142B. Precisely. Abernathy beamed. That's our phantom's birth certificate. Standard practice. The plat map shows where an easement exists, but the deed defines what it is, who it benefits, and what its limitations are. Now, you said your HOA provided you with copies of the relevant easements. Marcus nodded, pulling the documents from his binder. The HOA had sent him a packet of information in response to his formal request under paragraph 11.7. It included a copy of the deed for the view corridor easement. He handed it to Abernathy. Abernathy laid the HOA's copy next to the one he had retrieved from the county archives. For a moment, he was silent, his eyes darting between the two documents. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "Clever. Devious. But clever." He slid the two documents in front of Marcus. "Look here. This is the official, recorded deed from the county. It's 6 pages long. This," he tapped the document from the HOA, "is only 4 pages long. They've omitted pages 3 and 4. Marcus felt a jolt, the kind he felt when he discovered a critical flaw in a complex wiring plan. He scanned the missing pages on the official copy. His eyes widened. Page 3 contained the crucial clause. The easement was created not for the benefit of the Homeowners Association, but for a private entity, Williams Development Corp. It stipulated that the easement's purpose was to preserve views for a future commercial development planned for the adjacent parcel. A plan that was never realized. Page 4 detailed the easement's termination clause. It would automatically dissolve if the commercial development was not commenced within 10 years of the recording date. The deadline had passed in 1998. "The easement. It's expired," Marcus said, the words catching in his throat. "It hasn't been valid for over 20 years. "Worse than that," Abernathy said, his voice grim. "The HOA, under Patricia Williams' leadership, is enforcing a private easement that benefits her family's company. And they are using an intentionally incomplete document to do it. This isn't just a violation of the rules. Marcus, this is fraud." The twist was breathtaking. The entire campaign against him, the tree, the hedge, the fines was predicated on a legal phantom, an expired easement that Patricia was cynically resurrecting for her own purposes. But why the original commercial development never happened? What did she want now? The answer was still buried. But for the first time, Marcus had a weapon. He had the truth, recorded in indelible ink in the county archives. The discovery of the fraudulent easement emboldened Marcus, but it also painted a target on his back. Word of his meetings with Abernathy and his trips to the county recorder's office must have gotten back to Patricia, because her attacks shifted from bureaucratic harassment to direct, professional assault. The first blow landed in mid-December. It was a formal letter from the State Electrical Licensing Board, informing him that an anonymous complaint had been filed against his business, Thompson Electrical. The complaint alleged shoddy workmanship, use of non-compliant materials, and unlicensed apprentice labor, a cocktail of accusations perfectly crafted to trigger a full-scale, disruptive audit of his entire business. He knew the complaint was baseless, but the process itself was the punishment. It would mean weeks of invasive paperwork, site inspections, and interviews, casting a shadow of doubt over the sterling reputation he had spent 15 years building. It was a clear message from Patricia she could hurt him far beyond the borders of Oakmont Ridge. The second blow followed a week later. A certified letter arrived not from the HOA, but from his commercial liability insurer. It was a notice of potential policy cancellation. The insurer had been informed by a community governance organization that the property where his business was registered, his home, was in a state of chronic and unresolved violation of local covenants. The letter stated that if the violations were not cured within 30 days, his policy, the lifeblood of his contracting business, would be terminated for excessive risk. Without insurance, he couldn't legally operate. Patricia was trying to professionally execute him. She was cutting off his livelihood, using her position to poison his name with state regulators and national insurance carriers. The cold, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Then came the final, most terrifying document. It arrived in a thick envelope from a law firm, Venable, Finch and Associates, the official legal counsel for the Oakmont Ridge HOA. The letterhead was embossed, the language dense with legal threats. It was a formal notice of intent to place a lien. It stated that due to his failure to pay the accumulated fines and cure the outstanding violation, the association would be placing a lien on his property for the amount of $2,875.50, a sum that now included hundreds of dollars in legal fees. A lien. It was the HOA's nuclear option, a legal claim against his property that, if left unpaid, could eventually lead to foreclosure. They could take his home, his grandfather's home, all for a hedge, based on an easement that didn't even exist. The pressure was becoming unbearable. The fight was consuming his days and keeping him awake at night. Sarah, ever his rock, tried to keep his spirits up, proofreading his letters of response to the licensing board and helping him document every interaction. But he could see the strain in her eyes, too. One evening, working late in his garage trying to assemble the mountain of paperwork for the state audit, he saw a light on in Patricia's house across the meadow. He watched as she stood in her living room, her back to the window, looking at something on the mantelpiece. Curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a pair of binoculars he kept for birdwatching and focused them on her window. The image sharpened. Patricia was holding a small, silver-framed photograph. She stared at it for a long time, her severe posture softening for just a moment. As she turned to place it back on the mantel, he caught a glimpse of the picture. It was an old, faded photo of a man and a young girl standing on a patch of undeveloped, grassy land. The man, whom Marcus recognized from old newspaper clippings as Patricia's father, a prominent local developer named Robert Morrison, had his arm around a teenage Patricia. They were smiling, looking out over the very land that was now Oakmont Ridge. And behind them, in the exact spot where his grandfather's house now stood, was nothing but open field. In that single, private moment, Marcus finally understood. This wasn't just about money or a fraudulent easement. This was about history. This was about a piece of land her family felt they should have owned. His grandfather, Howard, a simple carpenter at the time, had somehow managed to outbid the powerful Morrison family for this prime parcel decades ago. It was a slight her family had clearly never forgotten. Her vendetta was a multi-generational grudge, and he had unknowingly inherited his grandfather's role as the enemy. The fight wasn't just for a hedge, it was for the land itself. The annual homeowners meeting was the biggest event on the Oakmont Ridge calendar, a mandatory gathering where the board presented its budget, held elections, and, for a brief, tightly controlled period, allowed homeowners to speak. The clubhouse was packed, the air buzzing with the low murmur of neighborhood chatter. Marcus saw dozens of familiar faces, people who had watched him with pity at the ACC meeting and who now avoided his gaze. Unwilling to be associated with the community's designated troublemaker, he signed up for the 5-minute public comment period, his name added to the bottom of a long list. At the front of the room, a large digital timer was projected onto a screen, a stark reminder of the limited window he would have to make his case. He had rehearsed his speech with Sarah a dozen times, timing it to the second. His evidence was arranged in a neat stack inside his briefcase, the HOA's incomplete deed, the full county-recorded deed, the annotated plat map, and, as a final flourish, printouts of the financial statements he had received from the management company in response to another formal records request. On them, he had circled the exorbitant monthly payments to Morrison Quality Landscaping, a company he had discovered was owned by Patricia's cousin. As he waited for his turn, watching the timer count down speaker after speaker, Patricia cornered him near the coffee station. Her smile was a predatory slash. "I know what you're planning, Marcus," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "And I suggest you reconsider. I've been reviewing compliance reports. It's amazing what you find when you look closely. For example, did you know that poor Mrs. Gable over on Lot 45 has a fence that's 6 inches too high? She's lived here 40 years. A widow on a fixed income. The fines for a fence violation, plus the cost of removal, it would bankrupt her. She'd have to sell." Marcus's blood ran cold. He looked across the room and saw Mrs. Gable, a frail woman in her 80s, chatting with a neighbor. She was a fixture in the community, kind and universally beloved. "If you get up there and make a scene," Patricia continued, her eyes like chips of ice, "I will make sure Mrs. Gable is fined into foreclosure. I'll personally chair her violation hearing. But if you walk away now, if you just go home and take care of your little hedge problem, I'll forget I ever saw her file. The choice is yours." It was a monstrous, impossible choice. Pursue justice for himself at the cost of destroying a vulnerable, innocent neighbor, or surrender and allow Patricia's corruption to continue unchecked. He looked at Mrs. Gable, then back at Patricia's triumphant smirk. He felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy, the principle of the rules he so deeply believed in. The system was only as good as the people who had the courage to defend it. "Marcus Thompson," the secretary called out, "you're next." Marcus walked to the podium, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, resolute clarity. He set his documents down and looked out at the faces of his neighbors. He saw Eleanor Vance in the front row, looking at him with an expression of deep anxiety. He took a deep breath as the timer on the screen reset to 5 hours and began to tick down. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and strong, resonating through the hushed room. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I live at 12 Sycamore Lane. For the past 3 months, your board has been fining me over a hedge, citing a view corridor easement. I'm here tonight to show you the truth about that easement." 4:45. He held up the 4-page document provided by the HOA. "This is the deed the board is using to justify its actions." 4:32. He then held up the 6-page certified copy from the county recorder. "And this is the complete, official deed. The one the board and its management company conveniently omitted 2 pages from." A murmur rippled through the crowd. 4:15. Those missing pages are rather important. They state that the easement was created to benefit a private company, Williams Development Corp. He held up the plat map, pointing to the annotation, and, more importantly, they state that the easement legally expired in 1998. The murmurs grew louder. On the dais, Patricia's face was a stony mask, but a muscle in her jaw twitched. 3:50. This board, under the direction of its president, has been knowingly enforcing a fraudulent, expired easement. They have used this phantom legal claim to assess thousands of dollars in fines against me and have threatened my home with a lien. 3:20. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. But the question is why? The answer, it seems, is about money. Just not my money. He held up the HOA's financial statement. This document shows that our HOA pays Morrison Quality Landscaping nearly 3 times the market rate for their services, a company owned by our president's cousin. This isn't about protecting property values. It's about enriching family members at our expense. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions at the board. The management company representative looked pale, sinking lower in his chair. 2:10. Marcus raised his hand for quiet. This board has forgotten who it serves. It has used its power not to build community, but to pursue personal vendettas and enable financial mismanagement. This must stop. 1:30. He then looked directly at Eleanor Vance. "We need a full, independent forensic audit of this association's finances for the last 5 years. And we need a board that serves the interests of all homeowners, not just a select few. 045. He took a final breath, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Mrs. Gable. Finally. I know that many homeowners in our community may have minor, long-standing compliance issues, like a fence that's a few inches off or a shed that was built 30 years ago. A good HOA works with its residents. Therefore, I propose that any new board should immediately implement a one-time compliance amnesty program, allowing long-term residents to register their existing structures without fear of reprisal. We should be protecting our neighbors, especially the most vulnerable among them, not targeting them. The timer beeped, its screen flashing 000. Marcus gathered his papers. A stunned silence hung in the air for a single, charged second before the room exploded into applause. The chaos that followed Marcus's speech was immediate and decisive. Before Patricia could even attempt to regain control of the meeting, a homeowner in the back shouted, "I make a motion for a vote of no confidence to recall the board." Another voice instantly yelled, "Second." It was Eleanor Vance, however, who sealed their fate. She stood up, her hands trembling, but her voice ringing with newfound courage. "I make a motion," she declared, looking not at Patricia, but at the assembled homeowners, "that this association immediately authorize a full, independent forensic audit of all financial records and vendor contracts for the past 5 years." The room roared its approval. The motions were passed by an overwhelming show of hands, a sea of righteous anger that swept away Patricia and her allies. The representative from Pembroke Management Services was visibly panicked, fielding furious questions from homeowners who now saw him as a co-conspirator. Patricia sat in stunned silence, her face ashen, the carefully constructed empire of rules and intimidation she had built crumbling around her in less than 5 minutes. She was left utterly alone at the board table, a president without power, socially and politically annihilated. The weeks that followed were a blur of action. The forensic audit confirmed everything Marcus had uncovered and more, revealing a pattern of kickbacks, bid rigging, and self-dealing that implicated not only Patricia's cousin, but the management company itself. A special election was held, and an entirely new board was voted in, with Eleanor Vance as its reluctant but determined president. One of their first official acts was to terminate the contract with Pembroke Management. Their second was to formally void all fines and rescind the lien against Marcus's property. Life on Sycamore Lane slowly returned to a state of quiet normalcy. But it was a new kind of quiet one, born of peace, not of fear. The memorial tree for his grandfather, a small oak sapling, was now planted in the backyard, approved unanimously by the new ACC. One rainy Saturday afternoon, as the fight began to feel like a distant memory, Marcus decided to finally tackle a project he had been putting off, cleaning out his grandfather's old roll-top desk. It was filled with decades of memories, old receipts, and forgotten letters. In a small, hidden compartment at the back of a drawer, his fingers brushed against a thick, sealed envelope. On the front, in his grandfather's familiar, steady script, were the words, "For Marcus, when the time is right." His heart quickened as he carefully opened the seal. Inside was a letter, along with a bundle of old documents held together by a brittle rubber band. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have faced a battle I always hoped would never come, but knew was always possible. When I bought this land all those years ago, I was just a young carpenter with a dream. I didn't know I was bidding against Robert Morrison, the most powerful developer in the county. He never forgave me for it. He tried for years to buy me out, to force me off this land he felt was rightfully his. I knew his ambition would be passed down to his daughter. Patricia. I saw the same fire in her eyes. That is why I took certain precautions. The documents with this letter are the original. Notarized copies of the easement agreement with Williams Development Corp. And the legal papers establishing the Thompson Family Trust, which now owns this house. I knew Patricia might one day try to use that old easement against you. But what she probably doesn't know is that when her father's company dissolved in the late 90s, I had my lawyer structure the trust in a very specific way. There is a clause, buried deep in the trust's bylaws, that automatically extinguishes any and all claims or encumbrances held by the Morrison family or any of their corporate entities upon my death. The moment I passed away, her family's last phantom claim on this land vanished forever. I couldn't remove the easement from the county records without a lawsuit, but I could legally neuter it from my end. I am sorry to have left you with this fight, but I also knew that if anyone had the integrity, the stubbornness, and the belief in doing things the right way to see it through, it was you. You have my hands, but you also have my heart. Your standing up for this home, for our legacy, was the final lock on the door I built to protect it. You have honored my memory more than any memorial tree ever could. Be happy here. This home is truly, and finally, yours. Marcus let the letter fall to his lap, a slow smile spreading across his face as he looked out the window at the rain-soaked yard. His grandfather had not just left him a house. He had left him a legacy of foresight and quiet strength. The fight had been his all along, the final, necessary step in a plan laid out decades ago. The schematic was complete. The circuit was closed.